Picture this: a city shrouded in the thick, humid air of a Roman night. You can practically taste the reek of cheap wine mingling with the pungent aroma of fish sauce, hear the rhythmic slap of sandals on wet, cobbled stone, and feel the hushed anticipation of bodies trading coins for fleeting moments of intimacy. Now, zoom in. Watch a solitary hooded woman, her face obscured by shadow, step inside the dim, flickering corridor of a brothel. It's not just any brothel, mind you. This is the notorious lupanar of the Subura, a place where whispers were currency and secrets were sold cheaper than wine. The madam, a formidable figure with eyes that have seen far too much, offers a slight knowing nod. She's expected. There's a tension in the air, a collective holding of breath. A moment later, the heavy veil drops, and every man in the room, from the roughest dock worker to the most jaded senator, freezes. Their breath hitches. That face, etched in marble and stamped on every coin in the empire, is unmistakable. It's Valeria Messalina, the emperor's own wife, the Augusta, clocking in for the night shift. It sounds like a fever dream, doesn't it? A lurid fantasy cooked up by a particularly imaginative playwright. But this isn't fiction. This is the story of Messalina, a woman who dared to defy every expectation, every moral code, every boundary of imperial decorum. She walked a tightrope between power and perversion, between political genius and utter madness. As we unravel her tale, stay with me until the very end, because by the time we're done, you'll have to decide for yourself. Was Rome ruled by a monster in silk, a depraved empress whose appetites knew no bounds? Or was she a woman so cunning, so desperate for agency in a man's world, that she weaponized gossip itself, using scandal as a shield and a sword? Who was she? Let's rewind a bit. Our story truly begins when Valeria Messalina was barely 15 years old, a mere girl, when she was thrust into a marriage with Emperor Claudius. Now, Claudius wasn't exactly a catch. He was old enough to be her father, perhaps even her grandfather, a man in his late 40s or early 50s, famously clumsy, a bit of a stammerer, and often dismissed as a doddering fool by the Roman elite. He was everybody's punchline, an intellectual who preferred books to politics, but one who, through a bizarre twist of fate and assassination, found himself on the throne. Imagine the whispers in the palace, the snickers behind hands. This young, vibrant woman married to him? What could possibly come of it? While Claudius stammered through his carefully prepared speeches, often tripping over his own words and sometimes his own feet, Messalina wasn't just sitting idly by, embroidering or attending to domestic duties, as a proper Roman matron was expected to do. Oh no. She was studying. She was observing. She was mapping the intricate, treacherous landscape of the imperial palace. She learned who slept where, who drank too much wine at the nightly banquets, who harbored grudges, and most importantly, who kept their secrets under lock and key. Secrets that could be pried open with the right leverage. Rome expected a quiet, demure empress, a dutiful wife who would bear heirs and remain largely in the background, a silent symbol of imperial stability. Instead, they got a teenager, barely out of girlhood, who seemed to instinctively understand that the fastest, most effective, and perhaps the most dangerous path to power in a world dominated by men was often through the bedroom and the back door. The ancient sources, those gossipy chroniclers of Roman life, absolutely loved numbers. They loved to exaggerate, to sensationalize, to paint in broad, lurid strokes. And when it came to Messalina, they certainly didn't hold back. According to them, she supposedly cheated with 25 men in a single day. Can you even fathom that? The sheer stamina, the logistical nightmare. Then there's the infamous tale of her winning a sex marathon against Rome's most famous and celebrated prostitute, a woman named Sylla. Our empress, it's claimed, outlasted her, emerging victorious after God knows how many encounters, and still had the energy, the presence of mind, to sign execution orders before sunrise. It's a jaw-dropping narrative, isn't it? A superhuman feat of depravity. Now, modern historians, bless their skeptical hearts, tend to roll their eyes at these particular anecdotes. The math, they'll tell you, is wild. The physiology is questionable. And the witnesses, almost universally second-hand or written decades, even centuries after the fact, by men with their own agendas and moral axes to grind. They point out that these stories often feel more like moralizing fables or political propaganda designed to shock and condemn rather than sober historical reporting. But here's the thing. Whether she actually did it or not, whether these stories were meticulously documented facts or wildly embellished rumors, the narrative stuck. It became part of the fabric of her legend because, let's be honest, it was just too juicy, too scandalous, too utterly compelling to ignore. And perhaps, just perhaps, Messalina understood the power of that legend. She let people believe she was capable of such extremes. She allowed the whispers to grow, knowing that a reputation, even a monstrous one, could be a formidable weapon in the brutal game of Roman politics. The fear she inspired, the awe, the sheer bewilderment, it all contributed to her mystique and, for a time, her terrifying power. Imagine a Roman night that truly comes alive only after the sun has dipped below the horizon. A night that smelled not of perfume and roses, but of fermented fish sauce, cheap oil lamps, and the acrid smoke from countless cooking fires. Under the sprawling arches and shadowy alleyways of the Subura, Rome's notorious red-light district, a place where societal norms were loosened and identities blurred, Messalina allegedly underwent a transformation. She swapped her opulent gold-threaded stola, the traditional dress of a Roman matron, for the drab, coarse cloak of a common slave. Her meticulously styled curls, symbols of her status, were tucked away beneath a russet wig, designed to conceal and anonymize. Then she would slip into a rented room, a stark contrast to her gilded palace chambers. A single straw mattress on the floor, perhaps a rough wooden stool, and a chalk tally board on the wall, ready to mark her conquests. The price for her services? A single denarius per client. Think about that for a moment, 1 denarius. It was the same as a dock worker's daily wage, a pittance for the Empress of Rome. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the transgression, the ultimate defiance. She used the name Lysiska, a Greek term that translates roughly to she-wolf, a predatory, untamed moniker that perfectly encapsulated her alleged persona. And she kept score, tallying her clients alongside the other girls, laughing, it said, that she could buy the whole block, the entire lupanar, before the first rays of dawn touched the city. But this wasn't just thrill-seeking, was it? Not merely a perverse game of slumming it for kicks. Rome, with its rigid social hierarchy and obsession with female virtue, absolutely loved to humiliate elite women who dared to step out of line. For an empress, the ultimate symbol of Roman womanhood, to work in a brothel was the most egregious, the most scandalous, the most utterly line-crossing act imaginable. It was public debasement on an unprecedented scale. If this story, with its almost theatrical level of scandal, feels like propaganda, remember a crucial truth about rumors. Every rumor, no matter how wild, needs a grain of truth. That grain has to be just big enough to sprout roots and grow into twisting, insidious vines. Perhaps she visited a brothel just once out of morbid curiosity, or a fleeting desire for anonymity, or even as a twisted form of rebellion. And from that single audacious visit, the tale grew, like ivy consuming a wall, becoming more elaborate, more depraved with each retelling. Or perhaps, and this is the truly chilling thought, she really did return nightly, not just for the thrill, but for something far more strategic. What if she wasn't collecting coins, but collecting secrets? What if those hushed conversations, those unguarded confessions in the dim light of a rented room, were far more valuable than any amount of gold? Imagine the information she could glean, the indiscretions she could witness, the leverage she could accumulate. Either way, whether truth or elaborate fabrication, those whispers didn't stay whispers for long. They became a sledgehammer, forged in the fires of scandal, that her enemies could eventually swing with devastating force. The Brothel Shift, real or imagined, cemented her reputation and fueled the fires of her eventual destruction. It was a scandal that defined her, a stain that could never be washed clean. Messalina's alleged affairs weren't, in the grand scheme of things, simply random acts of passion or fleeting desires for illicit pleasure. Oh no, these were strategic maneuvers, calculated power plays, hostile takeovers, executed with the precision of a seasoned general. Imagine a senator, perhaps one who might be wavering in his loyalty, or worse, considering a vote against Claudius's interests. Messalina, with her keen eye for opportunity and her undeniable allure, would reportedly send him a flirtatious note, a subtle invitation. The senator, flattered and perhaps a little terrified, would find himself sweating, not from exertion, but from the precarious position he'd landed in, caught in the wrong bedroom, entangled with the wrong woman. And then, at the opportune moment, a parchment, a detail, a piece of incriminating evidence would slide into a dossier, building Messalina's private arsenal of blackmail. The ancient accounts go even further, suggesting she ran her own exclusive, noble women only knocking shop. Picture this. Not a common brothel, but a discreet, high-class establishment where patrician wives, perhaps lured by curiosity or coerced by circumstance, were brought into Messalina's orbit. Once there, they weren't just engaging in illicit encounters. They were being blackmailed, pressured into spying on their husbands, on their families, on anyone Messalina deemed a threat or a potential asset. The ledger she kept, a terrifying inventory of who did what, with whom, and perhaps even with which household object, became her private insurance policy. It was a chilling testament to her ruthlessness, a network of fear and compromise that extended into the highest echelons of Roman society. Who could stand against an empress who knew everyone's dirt? And what about the emperor, bless his oblivious heart? Claudius, in his scholarly pursuits and his own peculiar brand of detached governance, seemed utterly blind to the machinations happening right under his nose. He thought, or perhaps preferred to think, that his young wife was simply prolific at embroidery, diligently working on her tapestries while he attended to matters of state. Meanwhile, the palace guards, those cynical observers of imperial life, reportedly joked that the very throne of Rome was held up by 4 legs, two of solid, unyielding marble, and two belonging to Messalina, constantly in motion, constantly seeking new conquests and new sources of power. It was a dark joke, but one that spoke volumes about her perceived influence and the emperor's apparent impotence. Her ruthlessness wasn't confined to sexual blackmail. Messalina was a master of political assassination, both literal and figurative. She even convinced Claudius, through a web of lies and manufactured evidence, to execute his own nieces, women who posed a potential threat to her children's succession. The plot against Claudius, which she so convincingly presented, was in reality little more than her own meticulously crafted PowerPoint presentation of fabricated accusations and cleverly manipulated fears. Anyone who stood in her way, anyone who threatened her children's future, anyone who simply caught her capricious eye, was swiftly and brutally removed. She eliminated rivals, consolidated power, and tightened her grip on the levers of influence, all while the emperor remained seemingly in blissful ignorance, or perhaps in terrified denial. Her reign was a testament to the raw, untamed power a woman could wield in a patriarchal society if she dared to shed all pretense of virtue and embrace the darkness. The year is 48 CE. Emperor Claudius, ever the diligent administrator, left Rome for Ostia, the bustling port city, to inspect grain supplies, a critical task as the feeding of Rome was paramount to imperial stability. While the emperor was away, absorbed in logistics and bureaucratic details, Messalina saw an opportunity. An opportunity not for a quiet retreat or a moment of reflection, but for a party so audacious, so utterly brazen, that it still makes historians gasp in disbelief 2 millennia later. She didn't just throw a party, she staged a full-blown wedding ceremony. And not just any wedding. She married Gaius Silius, a handsome and ambitious consul designate, a man of considerable standing. This wasn't a secret, clandestine affair whispered about in dark corners. Oh, no. This was a public spectacle, complete with all the traditional Roman trappings. A lavish dowry, the ceremonial veil for the bride, and a host of prominent guests who, whether out of genuine support, fear, or sheer morbid curiosity, brought gifts. To the average Roman citizen, and certainly to the political establishment, this looked like one thing and one thing only: a coup, dressed in the pristine white of a bridal gown. Silius, it said, wasted no time. He was given the keys to the imperial palace, the use of the imperial slaves, and, the emperor's own official seal, the very symbol of Claudius's authority. Messalina, with breathtaking arrogance, had acquired a new husband without bothering to divorce the first. In Roman law, this was not merely scandalous. It was an act of high treason, a direct challenge to the emperor's legitimacy and the stability of the entire empire. Word, as it always does, galloped to Ostia. But it wasn't just any messenger. It was a carefully orchestrated delivery by Claudius's powerful freedman, particularly Narcissus, a man whose loyalty to the emperor was absolute, and whose animosity towards Messalina was legendary. These freedmen, former slaves who had risen to immense power and influence within the imperial court, saw their chance. This was their moment to knife the empress, metaphorically speaking, without getting any blood on their own pristine togas. They seized the messenger, ensuring that the news was delivered not as a chaotic rumor, but as a meticulously curated narrative. They fed the emperor selective facts, emphasizing the treasonous nature of the act, the public humiliation, and the very real threat to his throne. Claudius, who was often indecisive and prone to being swayed by those around him, became uncharacteristically swift and decisive when other people did the thinking for him. Narcissus, ever the master manipulator, handed him a pre-written death warrant, already prepared, leaving no room for hesitation or second-guessing. Claudius, in a moment of utter clarity born of betrayal and fear, scribbled, "Execute at once." The die was cast. The Empress's reign of terror, her audacious power plays, and her scandalous defiance were about to come to a violent, abrupt end. The wedding that was meant to solidify her power, to elevate Silius and perhaps even replace Claudius, instead became the catalyst for her swift and brutal downfall. The imperial guard, dispatched with Claudius's hastily scrawled order, rode with a grim purpose back to Rome. By the time the thunder of their hooves echoed through the city, Messalina had already heard the whispers, the frantic warnings. The net was closing. She fled, not to the safety of the palace, but to the Gardens of Lucullus, a place famed for its exquisite roses, its tranquil beauty, and, ironically, its history of quiet, discreet murders. It was a place of both beauty and dread, a fitting backdrop for her final hours. There, in the lush serenity of the gardens, Messalina, ever the dramatist, began to compose tearful speeches. She rehearsed how she would plead for her life, how she would claim pregnancy, madness, any excuse, any vulnerability that might sway Claudius's heart, or at least delay her inevitable fate. But she wasn't alone. With her was her formidable mother, Domitia Lepida, a woman of iron will, arguably tougher and more pragmatic than her own daughter. Lepida, seeing the futility of pleas and theatrical dramatics, reportedly handed Messalina a dagger. Her words were sharp, unsentimental, and brutally honest. "You've lived more than most, now die with dignity." It was a final, desperate plea for a shred of honor. Messalina hesitated. The blade felt alien in her hand. All her life she had used her wit, her body, her cunning, but never a weapon against herself. She was a woman of grand gestures and elaborate schemes, but this was too much theater, too little practice in the brutal art of self-preservation through self-destruction. The soldiers found her there, in the gardens, not a defiant empress, but a broken woman. She was on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably, begging for an audience with Claudius, clinging to the desperate hope that she could still talk her way out of it, that her husband's lingering affection, or perhaps his indecisiveness, would save her. But the soldiers had their orders, and Narcissus had made sure they were unequivocal. They offered her one final chilling kindness. Before the emperor could change his mind, before any last-minute reprieve could arrive, a centurion, likely out of a twisted sense of mercy or simply to ensure the job was done, cut her throat. She was not yet 30 years old, a life lived in a whirlwind of scandal, power, and excess, extinguished in a moment. Rome woke to the news that the empress had killed herself from shame. It was the official narrative, the convenient fiction that allowed the empire to maintain a semblance of order and dignity. And everyone, from the lowliest slave to the highest senator, pretended to believe it. But the whispers persisted, the true story, or at least a version of it, circulating in the shadows, adding another layer to the legend of Messalina, the empress who defied all norms and paid the ultimate price. Her memory was condemned, her statues pulled down, and her name erased from public inscriptions, an official attempt to wipe her from history, but a futile one. And so, we arrive at the heart of the matter. How much of this sensational story is true, and how much is the product of ancient spin doctors? Enter our ancient narrators. Tacitus, the cynical, aristocratic historian who penned his accounts decades after Messalina's death, often with a clear moral agenda and a penchant for dramatic irony. Then there's Suetonius, the imperial gossip columnist, whose Lives of the Caesars is a treasure trove of scandal, rumor, and sometimes outright fabrication presented as fact. And finally, Juvenal, the satirist, who never let truth spoil a good punchline, using Messalina as a prime example of female depravity to rail against the moral decay of Roman society. These men, writing from their own perspectives and with their own biases, often copied each other like students in an exam hall, each adding an extra lurid detail, a more shocking twist, to spice the pot. It's a historical echo chamber where an initial rumor could be amplified and embellished until it became an undeniable truth. Modern scholars, with their critical lenses and a healthy dose of skepticism, rightly ask, if she were truly as reckless, as openly depraved, as utterly devoid of self-preservation as these accounts suggest, how on earth did she manage to survive for 8 years in a court where paranoia was the national sport, where poison was a common tool, and where one wrong word could mean instant death? It's a valid question. Perhaps she pushed boundaries, yes, but perhaps she just threatened the wrong bureaucrat, the wrong freedman, the wrong senator who happened to own the loudest, most influential pen in Rome. Consider the other side of the coin, literally. Coins minted during her reign depict Messalina as Augusta, a title she clearly milked for all its prestige. Statues, now mostly lost or defaced, portrayed her with serene beauty, a dignified visage befitting an empress, not the wild-eyed excess of a brothel madam. Somewhere between the cold, unyielding marble of her official portraits and the scorching, scandalous ink of the manuscripts, history split like a cracked cup. One side shows a woman of immense political savvy, a strategic genius who understood the levers of power and wasn't afraid to use them, even if it meant scaring the Senate into writing smut about her. The other side presents her as a living, breathing cautionary tale, a grotesque caricature of female ambition and sexual license, designed to warn future generations about the perils of letting women anywhere near the reins of power. The truth, as always, is likely far more nuanced and complex than either extreme. Messalina was undoubtedly a powerful, ambitious, and ruthless woman operating in a brutally patriarchal society. She was willing to break taboos, to challenge norms, and to play a dangerous game. But the sheer volume and extremity of the sexual accusations against her almost certainly served a political purpose. They were a tool to discredit, to demonize, and ultimately to justify her brutal removal. Her story reminds us that history is often written by the victors, and sometimes by those with the most compelling, most salacious, and most morally condemning narrative. Valeria Messalina remains, even after 2 millennia, an ancient Rorschach test for anyone who looks at her story. Men, particularly those predisposed to fear female power or sexuality, often see a succubus, a monstrous embodiment of unchecked female lust and ambition. Feminists, conversely, often see a cautionary tale about weaponized slut-shaming, a chilling example of how powerful women are often demonized and destroyed through sexual slander, held to impossible double standards that men never face. Realists, those who peel back the layers of propaganda and moral outrage, might see a masterclass in how to play, and ultimately, how to lose, a rigged game. She was a woman who understood the rules of power, but perhaps underestimated the ruthlessness of those who benefited from the existing order. Her story reminds us that every empire, every society, keeps a closet tucked away, usually in the darkest corner, labeled too dangerous for nuance. Inside that closet are the inconvenient truths, the messy realities, the figures who defy easy categorization. The impulse is always to lock the door, throw away the key, and whisper that the monster inside had it coming, that their fate was deserved. It simplifies everything, makes the world feel safer, more predictable, but if we peel off the thick layers of propaganda, the moralizing condemnations, and the sensationalist gossip, what do we find? We find a teenage bride, married off to a man twice her age, who quickly learned a brutal lesson. Love wouldn't protect her in the viper's nest of the imperial court. Only leverage would. She understood that emotional vulnerability was a weakness, but information, secrets, and the power to expose them were her currency. She collected secrets the way other women of her station collected jewelry, each piece a potential shield or a hidden dagger. And for a while, a terrifyingly effective while, it worked. She built an empire of influence, a network of fear and obligation, all from the shadows of imperial power. But when that leverage finally snapped, the empire didn't just need her dead, it needed her memory destroyed. Why? Because she was a dangerous precedent. Messalina had proven a woman could operate outside the prescribed boundaries, wielding power through scandal itself. They had to ruin her name before other women got the same idea, that they, too, could rewrite their roles. Her story is a chilling reminder of how far the establishment will go to control a powerful woman, and how a scandalized memory can be the most lasting cage of all. If you've found yourself captivated by Rome's most debated empress, by her audacious defiance and her tragic downfall, then you know what to do. Tap that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss more stories where power clashes with panic, where ambition meets its brutal end. And please drop a comment below. Let me know what you think. Was Messalina truly evil, a depraved monster born of her own desires? Was she engineered, a product of a corrupt system and the propaganda against her? Or was she simply early, a woman ahead of her time, whose methods, however shocking, were merely a desperate attempt to gain agency in a world that sought to deny her any? History handed her a script of purity, a role of demure empress, but she, Messalina, rewrote it in scarlet ink, with every scandalous act, every audacious power play. And ultimately, she paid for that rewrite with her life. Whether she truly punched the brothel clock night after night, or merely flirted close enough to the edge to smell the straw and the cheap wine, the empire never forgot the woman who turned rumor into a blade. Next time you hear ancient Rome called noble or virtuous, or a bastion of unwavering morality, remember Messalina, the empress who made the whole empire blush.